A boat is a craft used to travel on the water. Except this boat will never travel on the water again. And this one has never traveled on the water. Are these then even boats at all? Or is the word boat simply an ideological construction that actually separates us from the real world? What am I even standing on right now if it's not a boat? Now, this might seem like a silly question, but I think it's very important to question our most basic assumptions, our ideological constructs, the way in which we experience the world, especially if we hope to change the world through political action. Theodor Adorno was a German philosopher with a Jewish father who was forced to flee Germany in 1934. In his book, Negative Dialectics, Adorno advanced several ideas which he felt updated the ideas of Marx's dialectical materialism to account for the rise of fascism, the Holocaust, and many other phenomena which Marx could not have accounted for in his time. The word boat, according to Adorno, is a symbol. It holds the content of an idea, a thought construct, a concept. Each concept applies to many different objects, to many different things. The word boat, for instance, applies to all things, all objects that are boats. But this concept of a boat, which I summon by word, is fundamentally different from the actual objects which my mind conceives of as boats. Concepts are inherently limiting, and the concepts we hold in our heads will never universally or perfectly mirror the real world objects which they represent. In other words, the things we think of as boats, we are separated from them by the very language we use, by the very word boat. That thing over there, which I call a boat, is not materially defined by the word boat. Blowing your mind yet? Yet, whenever we humans realize that some concept we hold is inaccurate or incomplete, we will always try to improve that concept and our understanding of the real world to make the concept more perfect and more accurate. As Marx and Engels indicated, we are always striving to make our ideology more closely aligned with reality, even if we know that that work will never truly be complete. This is the work of science, and it must be the work of our politics. So Adorno believed that we should always be skeptical of our own ideas, of our own concepts, and that we should recognize that harm can come from concepts which are ill-conceived. And Adorno also knew that some things simply could not be conceptualized at all. Adorno famously said, "To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric." What this means is that in the wake of something as indescribably horrifying as the Holocaust, all of our projects and endeavors occur in the shadow of it, because we could never fully conceptualize the real true nature of something like the Holocaust, because it was just too large, too terrible, too weighty to ever grasp or comprehend as a concept. All of our efforts to communicate stand in some way in contrast to that inability to conceptualize. In Adorno's words, the feeling which after Auschwitz resists every assertion of positivity of existence as sanctimonious prattle, as injustice to the victims. Adorno was rejecting Hegel's notion that humanity is always rising higher and higher towards some absolute truth, and rejecting the notion that dialectical synthesis is always a step forward. Sometimes, according to Adorno, dialectical processes can actually move us backwards, and Auschwitz was undeniable evidence of this fact. Adorno wrote that we must change our thinking drastically so that something like Auschwitz could never happen again. Hitler has imposed a new categorical imperative upon humanity in the state of their unfreedom, to arrange their thinking and conduct so that Auschwitz never repeats itself, that nothing similar will ever happen. According to Adorno, only materialism could meet the demands of this moral imperative, and only a form of materialism which could account for the negative dialectics which he described. Auschwitz irrefutably demonstrated the failure of culture, that it could happen in the midst of all the traditions of philosophy, art, and the enlightened sciences says that in them dwells untruth. All culture after Auschwitz, including its urgent critique, is garbage. Adorno's prescription for how to think and behave after Auschwitz was to be radically self-critical. We must always strive for skepticism of our own ideology and praxis, to constantly question ourselves and our understanding, and to recognize the limitations of our concepts, and to test and challenge our own ideological positions constantly. After all, the Third Reich's Nazi philosophy was rooted in a positivist conception of a German destiny for an ideologically constructed Aryan race, which was pseudoscientifically believed to be superior to all other races. In short, Adorno begged us to question our own ideologies, to challenge ourselves, to change the way we think so that nothing like Auschwitz could ever happen again. Jacques Derrida was another Jewish philosopher who was affected by the anti-Semitic fascism of the early 20th century. Born in 1930, as a boy in French Algeria, he was kicked out of his school by the Vichy French government for being Jewish. Derrida saw himself as a historian and originated the approach to history and philosophy which he called deconstruction. He challenged many long-standing assumptions about human history and society and made the observation that human structures and institutions cannot be understood without first understanding the histories of how they came into being. Derrida was very interested in problems which seemed to have no solution, situations in which finding a path forward was difficult or impossible, where two conflicting answers seemed to be true at the same time. And Derrida called these moments of paradoxical unsolvability aporias. Take, for example, the concept of now. Now is the time that is taking place before the future and after the past, but it is impossible for a human to truly contemplate what is happening now. If we try to contemplate a moment of now, then by the time we think of it in our brains, it has already become the past, and we're simply considering a memory of what has very, very recently occurred. Yet it's certain that now exists and that we as humans experience now in some way, given that we exist and think within the time that is now. And so there is not a simple, complete answer to the question, what is now? And that makes now a fundamentally aporetic concept. Derrida believed that aporia was a fundamental aspect of politics. According to Derrida, ethics, politics, and responsibility, if there are any, will only ever have begun with the experience and experiment of the aporia. Derrida pointed out that the foundation of any political state or institution is aporetic by nature. For example, when the United States was founded by the Declaration of Independence, it constituted an aporetic paradox because it was founded through a declarative act of itself. In other words, through what Derrida calls a coup of force, the United States is an entity which called itself into being, which breaks the very laws of causality.
So, was the Declaration of Independence simply describing an entity which already existed prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, or did the signing of the Declaration of Independence bring that entity into being?
As Derrida puts it, one cannot decide, and that's the interesting thing. The force and the coup of force of such a declarative act, whether independence is stated or produced by this utterance, this obscurity, this undecidability is required in order to produce the sought-after effect. According to Derrida, in order for a state to become legitimate in the eyes of the people, this initial foundational aporia must fade away and disappear over time so that that foundation of the state is never called into question. In some cases, the aporia is just too strong and causes destruction, such as in South Africa's apartheid government, which was founded by a small white minority to oppress the black indigenous majority. Nelson Mandela was able to leverage this obvious aporia to found a new state, but even this founding was an aporetic coup of force. The aporia in political action is unavoidable. Similarly to South Africa's apartheid government, the so-called founding fathers of the USA who signed the Declaration of Independence simply declared themselves to be representatives of the United States of America, the United People of America, even though they originally only represented wealthy, landowning white people in that landmass. The aporia of this foundation, the paradoxes and self-contradictions which undermine the legitimacy of the state must be pondered if one is to make any attempt at understanding the current United States of America. You may be beginning to see now how this dovetails with Zizek's concept of ideology and Gramsci's ideas of capitalist hegemony. We're expected to take the existence of the state for granted, to view the state as an entity which should not be questioned. We should not question the formation of the state, the legitimacy of the state. That the state exists and should exist and must exist is considered common sense by most people. And so burying Concealing, forgetting this aporia of the foundation of the state is an ideological construction of capitalist hegemony. Now, this is all very relevant to us as political activists and revolutionists because such aporias have been and will be inherent to every political action and every political institution, and that's just something we got to deal with. We as socialists claim to speak for and work on behalf of the proletariat, don't we? We hope to eventually declare an independent and free society into existence, but this institution of a new society will come by necessity through a coup of force. We will have to acknowledge and confront these and other aporias which we ourselves will manifest into existence if our revolution is ever successful. For Derrida, aporias are not inherently bad, they are simply unavoidable. Discovering aporias that are rooted in our social, cultural, and political structures is fundamentally important if we want to have any hope of understanding them more deeply. Like Marx, Engels, and Adorno, Derrida did not believe humanity would ever come to an absolute or perfect understanding of reality, and aporias are a big reason why. Derrida knew that we could not simply negate or extinguish all aporias from existence. We must indeed find ways to exist through aporias and try our best to understand them as completely as possible through deconstructive analysis. So what to make of all this? If it's true, as Adorno submitted, that positive dialectical progress is not inevitable, that humanity has no predestined path, and that we can indeed slip backwards, if it's true, as Derrida says, that some unsolvable aporetic quandaries surround us, if it's true, as Zizek and Lacan point out, that we can never fully free ourselves from the restraints of our ideology and language to access a direct and fully accurate perception of reality, what are we to do? Admitting that these kinds of constraints and barriers to our understanding may exist, and indeed aggressively seeking them out, is not the same as admitting defeat in the face of the unknown and the unknowable. On the contrary, it should make us hopeful that we can achieve a better and deeper understanding of ourselves and our reality. Knowing that there is always more that we can learn and understand should excite us and inspire us to do just that, to constantly challenge ourselves and our own ideas in search of deeper truth. Epistemology and ontology, materialist dialectics and deconstruction, and aporia, these are all tools we can use to advance our understanding of reality and to advance our movement politically. With these tools, we can seek out contradictions between our ideology and the material world, find the inherent contradictions and paradoxes that permeate our own ideology, and hopefully liberate ourselves and others from false consciousness. We have to admit to ourselves that we observe this game of chess that is reality, not from the top-down perspective of a player with a complete view of the board and a comprehensive understanding of the rules, but rather from the perspective of a single piece. And we have to try to work out our own understanding of our role in this magnificent game for ourselves. We must know that what may appear to be a sturdy and sound vessel of ideology carrying us across the sea of reality may indeed be little more than grounded wreckage, which we must deconstruct and carefully reassemble if we ever hope to reach our destination. Damn, I wrote the shit out of that line. Now, I know these ideas seem probably complicated if you're not familiar with them. They probably seem esoteric, maybe even useless. But epistemology and ontology, materialist dialectics, and deconstruction and aporia, these are all tools we can use to advance our understanding of reality and to advance ourselves politically. With these tools, with this understanding of ideology and the ways in which our minds and reality function, we can seek out contradictions between our ideology and the material world. We can see the inherent contradictions and paradoxes that permeate our own ideologies, and we can hopefully liberate ourselves and others from false consciousness. Honestly, we're barely even scratching the surface on these ideas, and I, of course, had to make some gross simplifications and generalizations to fit all of this into a reasonably short and easy to follow video, but I hope you've at least gotten a glimpse at why these philosophical issues matter for political activists, and I hope it will inspire you to study more. It's important to understand why we believe the things we believe, how we come to know things, and whether or not our ideological positions reflect material reality. In a future video, we'll take a look at existentialism and how a lack of any preordained human destiny should guide us towards anarchism, to the deconstruction of hierarchy, and why negating the contradictions of the state and capitalism would be cool and awesome. If you want to learn more about these topics, there are plenty of links in the description below, and feel free to deconstruct me and this video in the comments. I'm American Johnson, or am I? This is Non-Compete, or is it? And we're sitting here on a boat in Hoi An, Vietnam, or are we? Anyway, thanks for watching. Put your hands up. Come forward. Forward, 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 forward. Forward. Stop. Back a little bit.